Welcome to a special year-end edition of the Grueling Crew Sports Network. Today, we are going to look at the top 10 sports moments of 2019. I am your host, Mike Goodpaster. I want to welcome in my guest, Lukas Weese. How you doing, Lucas?
Mike, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on. And what a year 2019 was in the world of sports. Looking forward to breaking it down with you.
Yeah, now that you're in the real world and have a Skype account like everybody else, we can hear you clearly.
Thank goodness we finally got that figured out after 2 years. Just in time for the end of the decade.
Yeah, and I mean, when I went through this top 10, it was a great year in sports. And the thing is, it's spread out kind of over all sports. Let's start off at number 10. What was your number 10?
Well, my number 10 will make you happy because it's related to your country, but not necessarily the sport that you may like. It's the Women's World Cup soccer, U.S. soccer team. And for me, I think, as you know, soccer is a sport that's definitely very global, as you know. And look, I mean, with the men's U.S. soccer team not doing well, the women's soccer team, they've been dominant. And certainly for the entire decade, but I think this World Cup, they were even more dominant. I think they won one game, like, just killed one country by, like, 2 touchdowns.
Yeah, wasn't it like 16 to nothing over, like...
16 to Thailand.
Yeah, I don't remember who it was, but I remember it was bad.
Yeah, and just, like, the swagger that they brought to every win, I think, was very fun to watch. And I think it's just a great sports moment for them to win, and that's why that's my number 10.
Definitely a great sports moment. I just think with the women's soccer, the fact that you're in the World Cup and have a 16 to nothing or 20 to nothing score kind of tells you where the sport stands right now. That's my only issue with this, because to me, this is like college basketball in the 50s or 60s where you got like 3 or 4 really good programs, but everybody else is still trying to catch up.
That is true, but I think you got to embrace, I think, how the team came together, and I just think, you know, they certainly played better the competition towards the end of the tournament, but I just think that there is no doubt in my mind who the best women's soccer country is, and that's the United States.
You just know who the best country is overall, correct?
Well, that's up for debate.
Well, you know what? Canada won a championship, but they had to win it in an American league for everybody to care. All right, my number 10, I'm going to women's sports route too, and I'm going Coco Gauff, who at the age of 15 had to qualify for the tournament, and then she stuns Venus Williams in straight sets, and then she beats a couple women who I probably could never pronounce their names, so I'm not even going to try to, and she ended up losing, or she ended with an eventual loss to what would become the Wimbledon champion. But I think the tennis world saw a potential star here, and to be able to do something like this at the age of 15 and have to go through the qualifying tournament, I think made this a huge sports story.
It certainly was, Mike.
And you have to be impressed that I picked a women's tennis story.
Well, and I have another women's tennis story a little bit ahead, but from a different country, though. So we'll get to that in a few moments.
Well, I'm an American. I only consider American things.
Good for you, Mike. I'm glad you're patriotic.
My number 9, I'm just the angry, ugly American. My number 9 is the upset of Anthony Joshua by Andy Ruiz. And I had to have a boxing, but still, this is a 26-1 underdog who only had a few weeks to prepare because you had Dillian White, who tested positive for almost every drug under the sun. And Ruiz gets knocked down in the 3rd round, turns around, knocks down Joshua 4 times, ends up winning the heavyweight championship of the world. And the other thing with this story is it kind of drops down because of what Andy Ruiz did over the next 6 months was party and eat. And gained about 20 pounds, got beat. And this is the thing. When I do the boxing show with Jeremiah Pricer, after this happened, I predicted this would happen because if you look in the history of great upsets in boxing, especially heavyweight champion, to become the heavyweight champion, whether it's Leon Spinks or Buster Douglas, these guys end up being their own worst enemy because they become so famous so quickly and they have so much money so quickly that they really are unprepared to handle this.
Honest to God, Mike, this was also my number 9. If you look at my list right now, number 9 was Ruiz beating Joshua. And you said it correctly, Mike, and you're obviously more of a boxing aficionado than I am, but I just put it in my list because you can't ignore the magnitude of this upset. And I think upsets are what, make great sports moments. And especially when everyone is going towards one person, especially in boxing when it's one-on-one, I think it makes the upset even more special. And just where Ruiz came from, his upbringing, and to get to that moment where he could, become, a huge boxing star. Unfortunately, like you just said, he just sort of pissed it all away by eating too much, and then he just got beat. But you can't ignore how great of an upset that was, and that's why it's my number 9 story.
Well, and it's why a movie like Rocky resonates with everybody, because boxing is the one sport where something weird can happen, and all of a sudden you're thrown in this situation where you can become the world champion. It's not like you're the worst basketball team in the NBA, and then all of a sudden the Toronto Raptors plane can't go, so now all of a sudden they're going to let the Memphis Grizzlies go play for Game 7 and get to win it all. And that's kind of what this is. I mean, in boxing, you get stories like this. And I think that's why boxing, movies-wise, sports-wise, boxing and baseball have kind of that romantic feel to them where things like this happen.
No doubt. Look at Cinderella Man. Look at Cinderella Man.
Oh, Cinderella Man is a great movie. And I think it gets undersold. And I'll tell you what, Lucas, when you get married and you have kids, when those kids are all out of the house and you're 55 years old someday, watch that movie because it becomes even more intense when you watch this father have to consider giving up his children for a while because he can't provide for them, and it's under no fault of his own.
And fun fact, Mike, some of that movie was filmed in Toronto, Canada.
But that's the part I didn't like, though, because it should have been in America. All right. Number 8, Lucas, what you got?
Well, to continue on theme with a Canadian moment, my number 8 is Bianca Andreescu. And I think similar to Coco Gauff, I think she really captivated women's tennis, and especially women's tennis in Canada, where we've had somewhat successful women's tennis players in the past, Caroline Bassett, Jeannie Bouchard to a degree, but no one with the meteoric rise like Andreescu. She won Indian Wells earlier in January. She had to miss many months of the year due to a shoulder injury. Her first tournament back is the Canadian Open. She wins that, first Canadian since 1969 to do so. And then at the U.S. Open, the season's last Grand Slam, she goes all the way to the final and beats 23-time Grand Slam champion Serena Williams in straight sets. So for me, Andreescu, at just 19 years old, she was the top Canadian athlete of the year. She already won that category yesterday. And to me, what she did was she just brought a new generation of tennis fans into the limelight through her relentless aggression, her ability to come back after being a set down, and just her swagger that she brought onto the court. So I think she's only, again, like Coco Gauff, like very young. So I think we're going to start to see them be very successful for the rest of the many more years to come.
Yeah, and that is the first time I've heard the name Caroline Bassett in like 30 years.
Yeah, no, so I'm going way back into the Treasury Trove.
It wasn't her dad, John Bassett, who owned the Tampa Bay Bandits in the USFL?
Yep, you got it.
Yeah, because I remember, I think she made it to like the semifinals of the U.S. Open at one point.
Correct.
And
so
she lost to Chris Evert, but if I remember right, to get to the semifinals, she upset Hannah Monlakova, who was a great
Yep.
tennis player.
Absolutely. So Caroline Bassett was the first Canadian woman to even get to a Grand Slam semifinal. Eugenie Bouchard was the first one to get to a final, and then Bianca was the first man or woman to win a Grand Slam from Canada. So just an incredible year for Canadian tennis, and Bianca was at the center of it.
I'm just glad we get to talk about Carlene Bassett, because I was about the same age as her, and I thought she was like smoking hot for a tennis player.
Yes. Good for you. Good for you, Mike. I'm glad you thought so.
My number 8, dude, in my defense, I was like 15 at that time, so it didn't matter. That's, I just watched her all the time. My number 8 is the St. Louis Blues, because it's the first time they'd ever won it. They had a rookie netminder in Jordan Bennington going into the playoffs. Not many people gave them a chance. And in the finals, they won 3 games on the road, including a 4-1 behind 32 saves from Bennington in Game 7 at Boston. And I just think that this was a great story for the city of St. Louis. And it had been a long time. I mean, this team had been in existence since the 60s, had never won it. They'd been to a couple finals right after they came into existence. But to me, this was a huge story.
I think it's much higher, just because of stuff.
It's because you're Canadian and love hockey, and I'm an American, and I love 1980 and the Miracle on Ice.
I think objectively, this is a much better hockey story than some of the other hockey stories in this decade. But that's just my opinion.
Well, I think it is too, but I wouldn't have that many hockey stories in the top 8. You still got to give me credit for having a hockey story in the top 8, though.
Well, that is true. Like normally, I don't know if a random team were to win, it wouldn't be. But I think out of all the hockey stories this decade, I think this may be the best one.
Yeah, only if you go back to the 90s with the New York Rangers.
Next to the 2010 golden goal for Canada beating the U.S., which brought a lot of joy to my heart.
We're not going to talk about that. I don't know why you want to beat Americans so bad. My number 7 is Brady and Belichick winning their 6th Super Bowl. Now, it's a 13-3. It's a boring game, but you have a quarterback who's 41 years old who wins another Super Bowl. Bill Belichick is now the oldest coach to win a Super Bowl at 66. I think there was a lot of historical significance in here, and it was the 6th title for the Patriots. So I'm going to put it there. But after thinking about it, I would probably put the Blues above it now. But that's my number 7.
And I would put the Pats also higher, because I think that achievement is also really spectacular for the reasons you just mentioned. My number 7 is Clemson. I know it was a long time ago now.
I actually have it higher.
Interesting. Okay. So for me, I got Clemson at number 7 because them winning a national championship. This was their 2nd national championship in 3 years. Not many people thought Clemson. And you, Mike, I got to give you credit for this. You were one who always picked Clemson from very early on in the season all the way to the national championship that Clemson was going to win. And I think that it really proved to me that Dabo Swinney has become the best college football coach right now. And certainly that was a title that Nick Saban had for many years. But the way that Dabo Swinney has really transformed that Clemson program, climaxed with their dominant victory over the Crimson Tide in the national championship game, Clemson is the model program right now. And I think the way that Trevor Lawrence played in that game, the way that the defense got to Tua Tagovailoa, it was just an all-around complete performance, and it really capped off an amazing stretch of college football that's continuing right now as Clemson's in the national semifinal.
Yeah,
so that's my number 7.
And I think a lot of people are overlooking them, but I think they're going to beat Ohio State.
I actually think so, too. I think, I wasn't impressed with Ohio State's first half against Wisconsin. And I think that Clemson's just a battle-tested team, and Dabo can really rally his troops and make them a really good, get them ready for a big game.
Well,
and
I think though.
He has that ability. Yeah.
I think what people miss is the fact that Urban Meyer's not at Ohio State anymore. Ryan Day has never coached in a game of this magnitude. You're giving Dabo Swinney almost 3 weeks to prepare. And if Urban Meyer was the coach there, I would probably go with Ohio State because I think they have the better roster. But the other thing is you've got Trevor Lawrence, who's shown in games of this magnitude he could be the best player on the field. And I'm not convinced Justin Fields is anywhere near Trevor Lawrence. And
no,
I think I like Clemson. But we'll save that for next year's top 10 maybe. Where are we at? My number 6? My number 6, I know you've got higher, but I've got Tiger Woods winning his first major in 11 years. That's all I've got to say about that. Because to me, it would be a easy top 5, but I just think he's a miserable human being that used steroids at one point in his career, and I just have a hard time jumping on. I know it's a huge story, and it's a big deal that it took 11 years to win it, but I have a hard time getting over the character of the man.
Mike, if we assessed every sports
I
team,
do.
And I know you do, but I think there are very few model characters in sports.
But I think Barry Bonds, people take shots at. Look at Tiger Woods, the pictures from like 2004 to 2008. I mean, something's up there. And it's one thing to do it that way. It's another way to do it the right way. But the stuff with his wife, I mean, everybody has character flaws and character issues. But when you get to flaws and issues that are of that magnitude, I think there's just stuff that I don't really want to talk about or deal with.
And to each their own is all I'll say about that.
Character matters. Character counts. They taught me that in school back in 1985.
Wait, Mike, you went to school? Wow.
Yeah, I went to school for a week. They kicked me out because, you know, I was too judgmental.
And you were too obsessed with Carleen Bassett.
Well, yeah, I just spent all my time looking at tennis magazines. Actually, I liked tennis so much in the 70s and 80s, I actually had subscriptions to a couple tennis magazines.
Good for you.
Yeah, I even played tennis. I was the #1 singles player on my high school tennis team.
So I heard.
I got video of it to prove it, too. I'll put it on YouTube someday. I was terrible, but I would hit everything back. Now, my only problem was sometimes you'd get those rich kids that had been trained since they were 8, and they'd smoke me like 6-1, 6-1 in like 12 minutes. But with normal kids, I could hang.
Good for you.
All right. So what's your number 6?
I'm going to say the New England Patriots for me. My number 6 and number 5, I had trouble figuring, flipped back and forth. But I think that the Pats' accomplishment was fantastic, obviously, given what you had previously mentioned about Brady at 41 being able to do this when most people wrote off the Pats after the regular season. They go on to kill the Chargers. They win a thrilling overtime game against Kansas City and compete and completely dominate Sean McVay and the Los Angeles Rams. It's just not in my top 5 because I just think that in this dynasty, in this decade, I think there were better Patriots moments. And I think, certainly Super Bowl 41 or Super Bowl 49. I think it was a very defensive game, and if you like defense, that game was for you. But I just think that there were better Patriots moments of this past decade. But nonetheless, still an amazing moment, and it's why it's my number 6.
I think there may have been no greater achievement for this team than to win that game, though.
No, because, Wade Phillips, he'd given Tom Brady issues always in the past. And the fact of the matter is, with this win, that's 6 Super Bowls and 9 appearances for Brady and Belichick. If you're talking about one of the greatest dynasties, if not the greatest dynasty, it's the New England Patriots.
Yeah. All right, number 5.
My number 5 is an event that I covered, just like number 6, and that's the Virginia Cavaliers winning the national championship in college basketball. And for just some context, let's just bring you back in 2018. we talked about how a great moment was when UMBC, a number 16 seed, became the first number 16 to upset a 1 seed, and that was the Virginia Cavaliers. And for an entire year, Tony Bennett and those players had to answer these questions about, can you get back there? Can you avenge these demons? And they got back to the March Madness. They were a number 1 seed. And even in that first game, if you remember, Mike, they were down at halftime.
Yeah.
And there were and Twitter was going off, and everyone was thinking, is it going to be a repeat of history? And then all of a sudden, Virginia came back and won that game. And then you look at the Elite Eight against Purdue. You look at the Final Four semifinal against Auburn, and then in the national championship against Texas Tech. They were down in all 3 of those games in the dying minutes of that game. And you look at guys like Kyle Guy and Kanate and Jerome and a lot of those players that just really rose up and were just clutch in the big moments. I think of Kyle Guy making those 3 free throws in the national semifinal to ice that game against Auburn. And then in the national championship, just the clutch shot making down the stretch to force overtime and then to win in overtime. This, to me, for a team sport, is the greatest redemption story, given how they were in the depths of despair losing a year ago to a 16 seed and to come back and win the national championship. It's a great story, and for me, it's a top 5 story. I was there and experienced it firsthand. I couldn't have been more prouder of Tony Bennett and that entire Virginia team.
I have it higher, actually.
Yeah, and you know what? I'm just gonna say this before you continue. I think the top 5 stories that I have, they can all be number 1 in my opinion.
See, I don't. I think my number 1 is the only thing that can be number 1.
Okay.
And
well,
I think it may surprise you. So.
And we'll get to that. Yeah.
All right. My number 5 is the Washington Nationals winning their first World Series. And this was the first World Series that featured a road team winning every game on the road. They scored all their runs in the final 3 innings to win the franchise's first championship with a 6-2 win against Houston. And I think, they're the underdog in pretty much every series here. Steven Strasburg, who was an 18-game winner during the regular season, went 5-0 with an ERA under 2 in the postseason, was named the World Series MVP. And when you look at the history of this franchise, I mean, I don't think Washington had won a World Series since, the big train, Walter Johnson, was pitching for them. They transitioned to Montreal, and the Montreal Expos had especially in the early 80s, some great teams, late 70s, early 80s, that never quite got there. They couldn't get past the Phillies and the Pirates in the late 70s. And then, of course, in 1981, the strike-shortened season, they beat the Phillies in a short series because of the strike, where they screwed my Reds out of going to the playoffs. And I like to bring that up as much as I can because I'm still bitter. And then, of course, Rick Monday's home run in the top of the 9th, Game 5, which kept the Expos out. And then, of course, 94, the strike stops what may have been a sure World Series championship for this franchise. And I think it was great to see, especially great to see him beat the Houston Astros, the Dodgers, teams like that who had bought their way there, and not that Washington didn't a little bit, but this was also a team that Bryce Harper wanted to get away from. He goes and gets a lot of money, and then he has to sit and watch these guys get a ring, so that kind of made it a little bit better also for me.
Yes, that was, and Steven Strasburg yesterday just got $250 million worth of a contract based on his performance, which to me is deserving because he was dominant.
Yeah, but he was beyond dominant. And even if he does nothing else the rest of his career, he earned that money.
Yes.
Because
I completely agree.
He won him a world championship. All right, my number 4 is the Clemson Tigers winning the national championships. 3 touchdown passes from freshman quarterback Trevor Lawrence. Now, this Alabama defense was dominant all year long, and a freshman quarterback he wasn't even a starter at the start of the year. If you remember, Kelly Bryant was the starter until about week 3 or 4, and Kelly Bryant had taken him that far the year before to the college football playoffs, and Trevor Lawrence comes in and scores 30 unanswered points on Nick Saban's vaunted Alabama defense. They end up beating Alabama 44-16. It's their second national title in 3 seasons. And I think the best thing about this is Dabo Swinney does things the right way. I don't think anything he's done has really been called, to the front as being possibly illegal or illegitimate, which makes it even better in my case because, with me, character counts.
Very on brand to you, Mike.
Yeah, so.
But it's a great story. I mean, it's a fantastic story to see a program like Clemson, which was in the doldrums, certainly for the start of the decade, and now is a powerhouse in college football. And Dabo has a lot to do with that.
All right. What's your number 4?
My number 4 is the Washington Nationals. And you mentioned a lot of the points that I would have mentioned, but I think what needs to be brought up is just how this decade, when they moved from Montreal to Washington, was filled with playoff heartbreak. Anytime that they made the playoffs, they couldn't even get out of the first round because they choked away leads. They blew, series leads. They were labeled as playoff choke artists up until 2019. And one point that you forgot to mention that I'll mention is they were 5-0 in elimination games, and they were down in all 5 of those games. In Milwaukee in the wild card game, they were down 2-1 to the LA Dodgers in the series, and then in Game 5, they were down. They swept the Cardinals, but then in the World Series, they were down 3-2 to the Houston Astros going into Houston. And in both Games 6 and 7 of that World Series, they needed to come back. They had to fight off, umpiring calls and win a Game 7 on the road. So it's the ultimate underdog story. And for a lot of those guys, like I look at a guy like Howie Kendrick, who was a minor leaguer last season, but made a huge grand slam in the NLDS and was great in the World Series. We mentioned Steven Strasburg. Anthony Rendon, too. He was the NL RBI leader last year, and he was very productive in the playoffs. So it's great for Washington, and they avenged and exercised their playoff demons.
All right, Lucas, what do you got at number 3?
My number 3 is the St. Louis Blues. And, again, on brand for me, being the hockey guy, but I do think that of all the hockey stories, certainly in the NHL, excluding Olympics, I think this was the best story. Let's just flash back to January for a moment. The St. Louis Blues had just changed their coach to Craig Berube, and they were dead last in the NHL. And if you look at the last few years, normally the playoff teams in the NHL, they're decided by American Thanksgiving. Not a lot of, fluctuation happens. So this was an anomaly for the Blues to be dead last, then go on a run that would be the best in the NHL to get into the playoffs, and then go and win the Stanley Cup. And if you look at that run, in the second round, they won in 7 games in double OT against the Dallas Stars. The Stars had a quality scoring chance that didn't go in. Jordan Binnington was, many people labeled as a perennial backup goalie, and he rose up, particularly in that Stanley Cup Finals, to win games on the road against the Boston Bruins team that many people thought had the Stanley Cup locked in the bag. So I just think for me that the St. Louis Blues, they're a great story, and I think an anomaly for sure to think that a team that was in last place, similar to the Washington Nationals, who were 19-31 through 50 games, but not as bad as the Blues, to then go and win the Stanley Cup is an unbelievable story.
Yeah, because there's a lot more cases of baseball teams that turn it around mid-season and pull
because
this
there's
off
162 games.
Yeah.
There's 162 games, whereas an 82-game season that's already halfway done, you got to do this in like 42 games, 40 games. So it's 41 games. So it's a lot.
All right, so we're at my number 3, and I'm going to go with the Toronto Raptors winning the NBA championship. You didn't think I'd have them that high, did you?
No, I did.
Okay.
I knew.
Because
I thought so.
It is. I would have put them higher, but it's the NBA, and you buy Kawhi Leonard for a little while, and you win a championship. If this was any team in the United States, it probably wouldn't even break my top 10. It's just because it is in Toronto. And let's face it, the history of basketball in Canada is the Raptors and the Grizzlies. The Grizzlies are no longer there. And of course, you had a team in the late 40s for a year in Toronto, which I think a lot of people forget. And they beat the Golden State Warriors, which was a team that was supposedly unbeatable. And really, most people going into the playoffs were picking the Celtics or the Bucks or the Sixers, even though the Raptors were one of the top 5 teams in the NBA pretty much the entire season. I think they were overlooked. And to come out and do what they did in the playoffs and then to win the NBA Finals against the Golden State Warriors, I think was a remarkable feat. And, they're showing right now how good a team they were last year because even though you took Leonard off of that team, they're still a highly competitive team that's going to be in the playoffs again.
Absolutely. Probably a top 4 team in the East.
Not as good as the Indiana Pacers, though. And if the Pacers win it, then it's the number 1 story.
There you go.
There you go. All right. My number 2 it's Virginia winning the title, but it's not just Virginia winning the title. It's the 2019 NCAA basketball tournament as a whole.
Yeah.
I know I got to cover the regional semifinals, regional finals with Virginia, but the Tennessee-Purdue game was unreal, and Carson Edwards and the things they did. And you look back at Liberty, beating Mississippi State, Mississippi, whoever it was. I don't know. I just know I won a lot of money on the Bet Now thing. But when you look at it, to me, the NCAA basketball tournament is the greatest sporting event. And that's because you get teams that are a 16 seed and a 15 seed or a 14 seed that all of a sudden find themselves in the Sweet 16. And Loyola Chicago a couple years ago going to the Final Four. Butler going to the Final Four twice in a row. This is a sport where the little guy, as we talked about with Andy Ruiz, still has a chance to compete and win because we see it happen every March. Where in the NBA, if the Raptors don't get, Leonard, they're not going to win. But this is something here where this is a team sport, and we see all these one-and-done teams like Kentucky and Duke, and invariably a team that has guys for 3 years, 4 years, as a team can defeat the collective individual teams. And I think that's what makes this great. And then I think that you cannot bring up enough how this is a team that lost to a 16 seed, and they were beaten on by the American public for a year. Everybody ripped Coach Bennett. Everybody ripped Kyle Guy. He wasn't tough enough. Coach Bennett couldn't win the big game. And then they go out and they win 6 straight games. And I would like to say they got a little assist in those last 3 by officiating each time. But that happens. And also I think, you look at that Final Four, nobody expected Auburn to be there.
No. Texas Tech.
Nobody expected Texas Tech to be there. Hell, I don't know if that many people expected Michigan State to be there, even though they were seeded highly. You look at the Kentucky's losing fairly early. You look at Duke getting beat. Duke almost lost in the second round to Taco Fall in UCF. And the thing is, almost every time you turn the TV on, there's a game you can find where something unexpected, something miraculous happens. And that's why I will almost always put an NCAA tournament in the top 5, no matter what, because nothing shows what sports is supposed to be more than the NCAA basketball tournament.
It's one of my favorite sporting events of the year, Mike, and you hit the nail on the head. And one thing I will add about this tournament that was really special is I think that unlike previous tournaments where, you have a great first weekend and maybe not so, an average sort of rest of the tournament. This was a tournament where the first weekend was sort of average, compared, minus the Duke UCF game. And then it just got really good. The Sweet 16 got better in the Elite 8, got even better in the Final Four. And have a national championship game go to overtime. The last time that had happened was, I believe, Kansas and Memphis back in the late 2000s. So it's just, for me, like, that's what I think what made this tournament so special, is that it was backloaded with a lot of great games when the games matter more. I mean, every game matters. It's a tournament, but the stage is bigger. It's the Sweet 16, the Elite Eight, than the Final Four. And that's when I think the games really reach their high level for college basketball drama and entertainment.
All right. What's your number 2?
My number 2 is Tiger Woods. And this would have been my number 1 had my number 1 occurred, which we'll talk about soon. Look, I mean, this decade, if you look at the decade as a whole in the sport of golf, Tiger Woods, even though he didn't play that much, still dominated the conversation. Was he going to get back? Was he going to return to that great form? And in 2017, I think it was really in doubt when Tiger Woods made it known at the Augusta National Champions dinner before the Masters that he couldn't walk, like he couldn't move because his back was so sore. And then he had this last surgery, and Tiger's had multiple surgeries for multiple different ailments, but he had this last fusion surgery, sort of as a last-ditch effort to see if he could come back to golf. And in 2018, he played a lot of golf. And it was climaxed by the Tour Championship win in Atlanta Eastlake, where everyone is walking behind him as he's walking up the 18th fairway. And that was his first win in 5 years. And I think he'll tell you today, and he said it back then, and he said it when he won the Masters, that winning that tournament gave him the confidence and the belief that he could win a major again. And there's no one who knows Augusta National who's an active player now than Tiger Woods. And to me, what's so great about that Masters is it was the first major that Tiger won trailing the lead. Every single one of his 14 previous majors, he had won when he was out in front. This one, he was not in the 54-hole lead. And it wasn't like Tiger dominated or put on a low round. He just played the course smart and strategic and waited for the other competition, like a Brooks Koepka or a Francesco Molinari, to make the mistake like they did at the 12th hole, putting the ball in the water. And I just think, for me, this is a redemption story, because I think that Tiger, as someone who was very aloof in the beginning of his career, there's stories of his caddy, throwing a camera's fan in the water and Tiger swearing and all this. I think he's evolved as a person through making a lot of mistakes that were self-inflicted. And I'll be the first one to admit that a lot of those mistakes he made were self-inflicted. But I think to come back from the injuries that he suffered to win another major, and not many people would have thought, and to see at the end of that tournament him hugging his kids, similarly to how in 1997 he hugged his dad when he won his first major at Augusta National. I just think it was a beautiful full circle moment. And to me, at that present moment, would have been the top sports story. And I think you can make a case it is, just because of how one singular athlete, Tiger Woods, can move the needle of the game of golf. If you looked at Twitter, anytime Tiger's in the lead of a tournament, yet alone a major, he's dominating the conversation. And there's very few athletes in an individual sport who can do that. And that's why it's my number 2. And your points are well taken, Mike, but I just think it's a big sports story given the magnitude of the person and what he had to overcome physically in the not so distant past, and then to get back to the pinnacle of golf and to win the green jacket, which many people consider is the top golfing accomplishment.
All right, what do you got at number 1?
I got another long speech ahead of me. So my number 1 is the Toronto Raptors. And it's not surprising because, yes, I am Canadian. Yes, I am from Toronto. And it's hard for me to be objective here because this is my team. They were started in 1995. I was born in 1996. You can guess the age, do the math. And, you know, for my whole life, pretty well, this team was a laughingstock. Like, if I said I was a Raptors fan to my friends, people would laugh at me saying,
Trust me, I know how you feel.
True. So,
because, wait a second. I want to bring this up. You can't be mad at those people because I get all kind of texts from you about the Bungles. But go ahead.
Yeah. No, we can all poke fun at each other's favorite teams. But I think the difference with the Raptors being a laughingstock is that they were sort of an island on their own, being from Canada, and I think the rest of the NBA treated the Raptors as a laughingstock because, look, you know, even today, the media in the U.S. don't pay as much attention to the Raptors compared to American teams, which is fine, but I think it was way more so back then when they weren't as good. So flash forward to, of course, this decade, and finally they start getting some playoff appearances. But they can't get over that hump. They could never beat LeBron James. So then they make a huge trade and trading away their franchise player in DeMar DeRozan. Now, I wasn't the biggest DeRozan fan, but he gave a lot to Toronto, and he put them on the map at least. But the player that they got in return, Kawhi Leonard, proving to be everything and more, and the first legitimate superstar that we had. Now, there were questions surrounding Kawhi. What is this injury? What is the validity of how he ended in San Antonio? What was going to happen on those fronts? And look, the last season, I think there were a lot of question marks. What is this load management? Why is he taking all these games off? But everyone said around the Raptors personnel to trust us, that this is going to eventually work out. Playoffs roll around. We lose game 1 to Orlando. Everyone in Toronto's panicking. But then we win that series in 5 games. We're down 2-1 to the Philadelphia 76ers. Game 4 is in Philly. We win that game on a Kawhi Leonard near the end three-pointer. We win that series in 7 games in the first buzzer beater in NBA playoff history with Kawhi Leonard's 4 bounces, swoosh, 2-point shot to win the series. We're down 2-0 to the Milwaukee Bucks. Number 1 team in the Eastern Conference. We have to beat that team. We have to win Game 3 at home. We come out with a double overtime thriller over the Bucks. We win that series in 6 games, guarding the eventual MVP of the NBA, Giannis Antetokounmpo. And then the final against the Golden State Warriors. This is a team that just had won 3 NBA championships in the last 4 years. I understand they were missing players, but look, you know, they still had Steph Curry, who's legit. Klay Thompson, when he was playing before he got hurt, was legit. And I think that series, even more than the previous 2 series, showcased the depth that the Raptors have now that you're seeing this regular season with the rise of Pascal Siakam and Fred VanVleet and Kyle Lowry, etc. And I just think, even more than us winning the championship, Mike, the entire country came together. And there's very few moments in my lifetime where I have seen that happen, where everyone was on Raptor fever. There were Jurassic Parks all over the country. Over 2 million people came to Toronto for the parade. And I just think that when your team wins, which I had never experienced in my lifetime, you can't help but put that as the number 1 sports story of the year. And not to say anything bad about the other stories, but because of that personal touch, it makes it the number 1 sports story. Just like if when the Reds won the World Series in those respective years, Mike, it would have been the top story in your year. Or if the Bengals win, or if the Pacers win.
Hey, quit making jokes, all right?
Or if the
like the
Leafs
Bengals would win
me.
a Super Bowl. Jeez.
But my point is, just to wrap it up and close the loop, I think it was an unbelievable sports moment because of how, to me, I think even more than them just winning the championship, I think it set off a real launch in basketball popularity across Canada that's going to have ripple effects for many, many years now. And I think you're seeing more Canadians starting in the NBA. You're seeing more Canadians play at legitimate D1 NCAA programs, and it's just going to continue. And I think that the Raptors winning a championship started all that, and just the magic of their run to come back when they did and to show that unbelievable championship grit and tenacity. It's my number one sports moment.
All right, I understand that completely. My number one sports moment, and what I look for when I pick the number one, it's the same thing I looked for last year. I look for something that's beyond sports to me, that moves me, that is something special, that when you see it, you never forget it. And for me, that would have been July 13th of last year. July 13th of last year would have been Tyler Skaggs' 28th birthday. And on that day, his Angel teammates scored 7 runs in the first inning, 13 overall. Remember, his birthday was 7/13. They combined for a no-hitter, all while wearing jerseys with Skaggs on it, above his number 45. And that presence was felt all night. And it started off with a perfect strike by Skaggs' mom, Debbie Hetman, in a pregame ceremony that moved all of the Angels to tears. You had the defensive replacement, Luis Rengifo's recovery on a ball hit so hard him at second base that it seemed for a split second that this was all going to be undone after 8 2/3 innings. And it was, to me, when you look at the numbers, like his birthday, 7/13/91, was the last time that a no-hitter was thrown on that day. And the things that happened that night, from them, all the players putting the jerseys down on the mound, to the fact it was the Angels' 11th no-hitter in franchise history. Skaggs wore number 11 at Santa Monica High School. Like I said, the last combined no-hitter in California was on Skaggs' birthday when the Baltimore Orioles combined to shut out the Oakland A's on July 13th, 1991. And it was kind of crazy. It was kind of like Jose Fernandez after he passed away a couple years earlier. You get the big home run. But this, even more, I think, with the entire team there to throw a combined no-hitter on his birthday, on the day when they're honoring him. And you had, Trout hits a 454-foot home run. And he takes it like a 30-second trot around the bases. When the thing I remember about this game is when it happened, I didn't even know it happened the day it happened. It was the next morning when, our friend Bobby Sheridan sends me a text with a picture. And I see the picture, and I've got the MLB package, so I go and I watch the entire game. I thought I was just going to fast forward to the end like I usually do and watch something like that. But from the pregame on, I sat there mesmerized, even though I know what was going to happen. And I usually, if I watch something that's 3 hours long, I'm falling asleep at least 20 minutes in, and probably again at about the hour and 40-minute mark. But this was something that really moved me. And when you put all the numerical things that happened there, it was almost like a supernatural moment. And that's a moment that sitting at 8 o'clock in the morning in Indiana the day after it happened, that actually it moved me to tears when I watched it. I mean, you felt that moment. And to me, that's what sports is about having a moment like that you never forget, whether it was the 1980 Olympic hockey team, Brett Favre after his father passed away, Michael Spinks winning a world title 2 days after his wife died, and we just did a show about Michael Spinks, and he fought Dwight Braxton for the undisputed light heavyweight championship. And a couple days before that fight, his wife had died in a horrific car accident. And they interview Michael Spinks on HBO in the locker room before that fight. And his daughter is in there with him, and his daughter's like 5 years old. And his daughter comes up to him during the interview and says, "Daddy, is Mommy coming to watch the fight?" And he has to go into the ring 10 minutes later. And I mean, it's moments like that. The Humboldt hockey team last year and seeing what happened around that. That's why that was my number one last year. Because it's something that affects you so deeply. And this is not to take a shot at you for having the Raptors at number one, because to me, what I think when you say Raptors number one is you have that feeling. That deep sense of this is emotional. I'm sure you probably cried when it happened, because
no doubt.
When that happens, it's something that, you grew up watching this team with your parents, your friends, and you all rooted no matter what. You cheered for them. You put up with people making fun of you for cheering for that team, and you always thought, well, someday, my team's going to win it all. But in the back of your mind, you think, are they really, though?
Yeah.
Is that ever really going to happen? And then when it happens, that's what makes that your number one moment. And for me, this game was something that out of everything I saw this year, it is the thing that moved me the most. And that's what I look for in sports. That's what I look for in anything I do. I look for something to move me. The high school football team that I coached this year, the year before we played for a national championship. This year we were 500. We go down, we play in a national tournament in a bowl game, and we lose like 35-16 to a team from Texas. And everybody's sending me texts because you could see the game. It was on YouTube Live or whatever, and they're all, "Oh, we're sorry you lost the game." And I'm like, dude, it was some of the most fun I ever had. And people don't understand this. I mean, when you see me and you hear me talk, you think the only thing that matters to me is winning. But it's not. The only thing that matters to me is that when I do something, it has an effect that can be felt. And we had 5 seniors that I've coached since they were in 7th grade. And when the game was over and the team comes around, it wasn't about whether we won or lost. It was about, this is the last time we're ever going to do that. And I think people miss that. People get so caught up into what's going to happen next that they miss what's actually happening right in front of them.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that, Mike, because, I mean, very, very profound. I mean, and that Tyler Skaggs moment, I remember that, and those emotions were certainly felt, but the way you conveyed it was very profound. And for me, like, I watched the clinching game with Game 6 of the Raptors with my parents. And, like, that was just emotional because, it's been a challenging year, health challenges with the family, etc. And to have that moment with them to celebrate our team, like, it felt like, because it was the only team from Canada to be able to finally prove the doubters wrong and win a championship. And then extending to that, I went to the parade, and, it was a moment that I didn't want to miss. And I took very few photos of that day and just put my cell phone away, because I think we're always, we're so focused on technology and needing to be one place here, one place there. So I put it away and just soaked it all in. And it just made it so real and profound to me. Like, even there, I was very emotional when the buses came and the players and the coaches were waving and everyone was happy, because let's face it, Mike, we live in a very polarizing, divisive, sad, angry world at times where people do crazy things. They stab you in the back and they're not nice. But when there's moments like that, like Tyler Skaggs, and just pure moments of just joy, seeing your team win a championship, you'll never forget it for the rest of your life. And for me with the Raptors, you with Tyler Skaggs, and maybe there's a guy from Washington, D.C. who had been waiting for that chance for his team to win a championship. They remember the days of the 30s when the Nationals won, and then they win a championship. Or a St. Louis Blues fan who had gone through heartbreak after heartbreak, and then they finally win. Virginia Cavaliers fans. Like, sports are so much bigger than just the wins, the losses, the numbers. They transcend society and who we are as human beings.
Well, how about this, Lucas? Last year,
Yeah.
you're covering the Final Four.
Yeah.
When you walked in that place, did you ever think, man, when I was 8 years old, I was watching the Final Four, and now I'm here, and they're actually letting me in for free?
Absolute, Mike. When I covered the Final Four, when I covered the Super Bowl, these were and still are staples in our family household, where I would sit with my dad on my couch and we would watch the Super Bowl and we would watch the Final Four and remember those amazing moments. And then you're here to cover it live, to see the stories come to life of these teams that have been through so much to get to this point. It's just the best feeling in the world. Like, I called my parents. I got to the Super Bowl 3 hours before kickoff to get into the media center and get settled and everything. And I called them from the stadium. And it was just a very moving experience because it's just like they weren't expecting the phone call. I didn't really know if I was going to call them when I was there. And it just happened. And it just brought me back to that place as a little boy, dreaming of maybe one day covering that event in real life, and seeing the smiles of pure joy from the players that won just made it all the more special. So sports is can be very frustrating at times, but I try to find the positives, and I try to always find the moments that move us. And I think this year it makes it really special because there were moments that clearly moved you and I think a lot of people across Canada, the United States, and around the world. And it's just the power of what sports can continue to do as we go into a new decade. It'll continue to do that, I think. And I'm just looking forward to seeing more history being written.
Yeah, and that'll start this weekend when the Raptors start a big losing streak, so I can start texting and making fun of them.
Well, they just broke a losing streak last night. They just broke their losing streak last night.
I know, I'm just teasing. I don't know what's happening in the NBA.
Kawhi Leonard actually returns to Toronto for the first time tomorrow.
Will they cheer for him?
Oh, absolutely.
Got to.
I don't think there's going to be I think if anyone is sitting, they should be evicted, because I think Kawhi Leonard gave everything he could have to this team for 1 year. I think deep down, if everyone was acting rationally, they would have said to themselves, it probably was 1 year and 1 year only. And he did it. He did the ultimate thing and brought us a championship. And I think made this team have that championship toughness that we still see now in the players that are left behind, like a Kyle Lowry, a Pascal Siakam, a Fred VanVleet, etc.
Well, I think it's possible the team already had the toughness. They just needed
True.
that one player that could put them over the top, because they were still making it to, the conference finals every year before that.
Well, not the last couple years. They lost to LeBron 2 years in a row in the second round.
Oh, was it the second round?
Right.
Tells you how much I watch the NBA.
Yeah. So, but I also credit Nick Nurse. I mean, he really was courageous, to say the least, in that NBA Finals for some of the strategies that he employed, like the boxing one against Steph Curry, that just really was pretty awesome.
It's kind of like the Doug Peterson thing in the Super Bowl with the Patriots. You got to be not afraid to lose the game.
Exactly.
And most of these guys are just trying not to lose the game. They're not trying to win the game.
Yeah.
And you put yourself out there, and maybe you get fired if it doesn't work, but you never know if you'll ever get another chance, so you might as well take a shot while you got it. Lucas, as always, it's been great to have you on, my friend. You want to tell everybody where they can hear you?
Yep, you can find me at Weese Sports on Twitter, at WEESE Sports. And Mike, I hope in a few weeks' time we could do the top 10 moments of the decade, because I think that'll be a real interesting conversation as well.
Yeah, most definitely. We will do that. I can tell you what my number one is, but then I'd have to kill you. All right, guys, make sure you check us out in a couple weeks on the greatest sports moments of the past decade. You can hear all the Grilling Truth shows anywhere you find podcasts now. We're everywhere. You can follow us on Twitter at Grilling Truth. Make sure wherever you're listening to us, you leave a comment. But we're going to wrap the show up from now. Remember, tomorrow, myself, Anthony Servino from the FF Faceoff, and Sam Teets will be in to talk quarterback rankings. But for now, for Lukas Weese, I'm Mike Goodpaster. You've been listening to The Grueling Truth, where the legends speak.